What's up, everyone? This is SLRLounge.com. My name is Pi, and I'm here with Pratik Naik. He is an amazing retoucher, and you also are a photographer too, right? You shoot and kind of do everything.
Thanks for having me, first of all, Pi. And definitely, that's right. I do a lot of post-production, retouching, as well as photography on the side as well. So it keeps my gears going, so to speak.
Awesome. Now, Pratik is the owner and founder of Solstice Retouch,
That's
correct?
right, yeah.
And you do a ton of different things, but your work has basically been, featured everywhere. You've been in Elle, FHM, GQ.
Yeah.
You've been in everything, right?
Oh, almost. I'm trying to be in everything. That's the
Trying
goal.
to be in everything. Okay. So his work has been pretty much everywhere. You are a master of retouch, and you do
Thanks.
retouching workshops too, correct?
I do. I started to do a lot of retouching workshops because there were a lot of demand for it, especially from photographers who started asking me about teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I wasn't really ready because I didn't know if there was a need for it or if photographers really wanted to know. So I took a pilot class, so to speak, did one. It turned out pretty good. So I decided to start upscaling a bit more and getting the word out there. And, kind of like our industry is today with social media, you have people who will always find you if they're looking for you. And so they wanted to inquire more about my classes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started making it official and offering more seminars for retouching. Yeah.
Well, we'll include that information below, guys. So be sure to check out the details on that as well. If you want to look into Pratik's workshops, if you want to learn retouching, this is the guy to go to. This is part one of our little interview series. And in this interview, I want to talk about kind of your background or how you got kind of started in doing retouch.
Sure. Essentially what happened was, about when I was in high school, so this was, I'm dating myself, but about 13 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
I had a class that dealt with Photoshop. I basically learned Photoshop through that class, and I found it really fascinating.
What version of Photoshop
This
was
is
that?
back in Photoshop 5 or 6.0. So not CS5, but the original 5
The
or 6.
original Photoshop 5, okay.
It's not one, but
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I touched Photoshop back then.
it's been a while, I think. But it's come a long way since then. So, we have tools nowadays that really have advanced Photoshop from Adobe standpoint.
Yeah.
But anyways, going back to the question, I started back in high school doing Photoshop pretty much for fun, like photo manipulations, graphic design.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, I used to do a lot of art, drawing, and painting. So it was right up my alley. It was a perfect transition from being artistic and then pushing to the digital age, because I thought that's where things were going in the future. And once I got into it, I realized that I liked doing Photoshop so much that I jumped into every avenue Photoshop offered, from graphic design to photo manipulation to just, playing with people's pictures for fun, like, they do on the internet with cat pictures and all that nonsense. And
Posting pictures of your friends doing strange things.
exactly. So I never had many enemies, strangely. They were always nice to me. And from there, I realized I wanted to be more creative. So I picked up a camera in college and started shooting. And that's when I realized that, hey, you know what, you still have to do Photoshop. There's no getting around it.
Yeah.
I thought that these photographers made it look amazing just by, getting everything perfect. And
I think that's a common misconception for people that are just getting into photography. They think, you see something in Elle or in Vogue or something like that,
exactly.
and you go, oh my gosh, how are they getting it like that? And then if you ever have a chance to see that raw file, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly.
There's that huge step of artistry in between the photographer and between the magazine.
That's right.
That often gets overlooked.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. And you don't realize it when you're beginning and when you start shooting, because that information isn't so available to you. And when you start digging in the field, you realize there's a lot that goes into the production aspect, and you really do have to have a lot to it, from makeup to modeling to proper lighting to everything. And so that got me fascinated. I said, I will learn more about the industry because I have this Photoshop knowledge that I could apply, and it's very mysterious. And when somebody says I can't do something, I want to do it even more. So I went out there and found as much as I could. And I realized at that time there wasn't much information out there for retouching specifically as there is now. Especially with sites like you guys, where you're offering so much free information. It's amazing, like people taking advantage.
They're still not happy.
You should be happiest. You definitely. I think I would have been spoiled if I started this day and age with how much there is to learn. So I would learn tutorials, just random tutorials, just to see if I could grasp any additional tool that I didn't know about, and I just picked it up from there. And I think that's the catalyst that just switched me from photography to retouching, because my Photoshop passion came back, and I decided that I wanted to just do retouching full time. And as a photographer, as a background, people were happy to see that in a way where they felt that they could come to me for Photoshop.
Now, I'm super curious. We talked about kind of like learning. You're mentioning how basically learning back then is so completely different now. I remember 10 years ago when I try and learn a subject, you'd pick up these books and
Yeah.
they would be, you would like read 400 pages and
Yeah.
you maybe glean a few things from
Yeah.
them that would actually be like usable. But back then, it's like, how do you, there's certain retouching techniques that are very advanced.
Yeah.
Things that today that everybody kind of just knows, like frequency separation. If you do retouch, you know frequency separation.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very common technique used, and you can probably find a million tutorials online now for that.
Exactly.
But back then, were you trying to essentially develop these kind of techniques on your own? Were you just playing around and saying, I'm just going to try this? How were you getting these kind of techniques when really books couldn't offer that?
Sure. So it was a lot of self-discovery, actually. Good thing that you mentioned that. So, for example, if I did a lot of photo manipulation with cars, so for say I wanted to change a car look like something I wanted, I would have to learn the individual tools first, and then think mentally, all right, so how can I apply these tools to the end result that I wanted? It wasn't a tutorial like, oh, how to retouch a person. There wasn't. It wasn't that A to B. It was basically, all right, here's the tools. You figure it out.
Yeah.
And do your best to find whatever's out there.
Yeah.
And so it was a mix of both. I tried to find these tutorials, and secondly, I was trying to develop ways to make it more efficient and improve upon what was already there. Because the industry at the time was very cut and dry. It was, you use these tools, but you don't do anything else. Because if you were retouching for a studio, for example, they wanted you to follow by their rules, and you couldn't have the flexibility of doing it on your own. And there weren't many freelancers out there either. So I kind of wanted to change it up, do things my way, kind of backtrack and apply what I did in graphic design and other industries where Photoshop was used and put it into retouching. So it was a mix of trying things, discovering things on my own, and putting a community together to have everyone develop things together and advance the industry.
Yeah. So once you basically had started getting in more and more into retouch, you mentioned that you kind of enjoyed the retouching side more than the actual photography side.
Yeah.
But what were you doing also on the photography side to kind of help you grow, and how did that really play into your retouching abilities? Do they help each other out, you feel like?
I definitely did. I think I wouldn't say every retoucher should take up photography, but it's very vital because, when you come from a photography background, you kind of understand different lighting. You kind of understand what the photographer went through to get that shot, because some days you're out there for like 12 hours, lugging your battery gear around and your lenses, and it's heavy stuff. And you finally get this shot you come home to that you're so proud of. You don't want to give it to somebody who really doesn't understand that fundamental value of what that shot really meant for a photographer. You have to think about, what it meant for the photographer. And so I approach it kind of how, if I was the one shooting that file, what it meant. Because I know what it takes to get that one shot out of like 400 files and narrowing it down to one, and then finally retouching that one. And it's just a big understanding lesson, so to speak, going from photography to retouching. And the other thing is, whenever you start manipulating lighting in post-production, you get a better sense of what it will look like when you manipulate it and how it really should look in real life. Because in real life, when you're manipulating your lighting, you change your grid to, you put something else on it, for example, another modifier, it changes dynamics. And if you were to increase the dynamics of your photo, you should know what it looks like in reality. So you kind of get this connection, both in a personal way and in a good lesson as well.
Do you feel like knowing necessarily let's say knowing the metadata or how an image was shot, knowing the lighting and the kind of things, do you feel like those are important to the way you approach your retouch, or is that information that's nice to have, but generally you're not really caring about that?
No, I do care a lot, especially because if I realize sometimes people like to shoot, stop down like f7 as opposed to like 2.8, and it affects the picture, because sometimes when you shoot at f2.8, things get really soft, especially the pore details and things. And when you're shooting at f7, you get a lot more value there. So you can communicate back to your photographer saying, I understand that this photo may take this many hours, but if you want to cut that down, I can suggest you do something else a little bit differently to help you cheapen your retouching costs as well. So I can communicate in ways that really help the photographer, and we can bounce back and forth as well.
Yeah, and you could really only do that if you understood photography, basically. So.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least even if you didn't shoot, try to get a fundamental aspect of what it is that the camera does and everything of that nature.
So at what point did you feel like, okay, this is what I want to do for my career? I mean, 13 years ago you got started in this, but when was it where you thought, okay, this is actually what I want to do, and retouch more specifically is the area that I want to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one question that I think all photographers or artists in general ask themselves is, when do we make that jump into doing it full time? Especially because we all have pressures of, bills and things that are not so glamorous, that we don't see in our photos that look so glamorous to everybody else. So essentially, I had a business background, a business and marketing background. And after college, I worked for 2 years doing different types of sales and things like that in the hotel industry. And that was because my family had a hotel background. And that's when I realized that, my passion, even after college, is still Photoshop and retouching and everything art, basically. And I wanted that to be what I woke up to every single day. And, people always say that you can't do it, especially people that your family, your friends, I was lucky to have a family that supported me, but I know a lot of people don't. They have a lot of pressures, and
Sure.
And so I decided that I needed to logically lay out a game plan and think about when I would be able to make the jump. And so over those 2 years, I kind of laid out a game plan about, this is the level that I need to be at to successfully quit and just maintain myself full time. So you definitely have to have those realistic expectations, as well as the drive that's your passion together to really go for it. And that's what my defining point was.
So that was essentially like 2-3 years after college?
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly 2 years after college. I just jumped ship.
Wow, okay. So, well, that leads to a bunch more questions, and we're going to cover that in part 2. We're going to go over basically how it was getting your business off the ground and getting started.
Yeah, sure.
So we'll see you guys in that next episode.